Sometimes it's loud, like applause, like cameras clicking, like the rustle of expensive suits in a boardroom. But in Sheikh Amir Ulfad's world, power was silent. When he entered a room, no one announced him. There were no bodyguards barking orders, no assistants clearing a path. Yet somehow everyone moved, quietly, instinctively, as if an invisible force shifted the air itself to make way for him. Born into a dynasty of oil tycoons and political architects, he was groomed from childhood not to lead but to control. At the age of 12, he could quote economic reports better than men 3 times his age. At 17, he attended international meetings, not as a guest, but as an observer, the silent shadow in the room absorbing everything. By 25, he made his first strategic acquisition and dismantled a failing European energy firm in under 6 months, turning it into a dominant force. Investors called it genius. His rivals called it bloodless execution. He called it business. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice. He spoke rarely, and when he did, people leaned forward, not wanting to miss a word. He never rushed. He never repeated himself. If you didn't understand him the first time, he simply assumed you weren't worth understanding. There were rumors about him. That he once walked away from a deal worth $3 billion because the opposing chairman hesitated before shaking his hand. That he kept a list of names, not enemies, not allies, just names. Nobody knew which list you ended up on until it was too late. Journalists tried to find cracks in his story, a scandal, a weakness, a secret lover, maybe a hidden past. They found nothing. Every photograph, every interview, every public move was calculated with surgical precision. Like a chess grandmaster who already knew how the game ended before the first piece moved. People respected him. People feared him. But no one truly knew him. They called him the Falcon, not just for his lineage but for the way he looked at people, sharp, analytical, almost predatory. Not with cruelty, but with a cold, perfect clarity, as if he could see exactly who you were and how much you were worth to him. And of all the things wealth had given him, power, fear, influence, there was one thing he had never once allowed into his life. Distraction. Until the day a woman with no title, no status, and no right to speak looked him straight in the eyes. And didn't look away. Her official title in the company records was insignificant, administrative support, level 2. A phrase so bland, so intentionally vague, it could mean 100 things or nothing at all. To most people in the skyscraper, she was just the woman in the corner, the one who carried folders, brought documents, and blended into the background like the wallpaper. Her name was Serena Carter. She never corrected those who forgot it. She moved like someone who had mastered the art of invisibility, not through fear, but through choice. She understood something most people never did. When people think you're insignificant, they speak freely. They reveal things. They expose themselves. She wasn't supposed to be in meetings where billions were discussed. She wasn't supposed to stand close enough to hear the whispered strategies of powerful men. And yet, she was always there. They didn't notice her because she trained them not to. She walked without sound. She spoke only when necessary. Her eyes were steady, but never confrontational. She dressed in neutral colors, never too elegant to draw envy, never too plain to invite pity. Perfectly calibrated to exist in that gray zone where the human mind stops registering presence. But she watched. Every deal. Every hesitation. Every arrogant smirk from men who thought they ruled the boardroom. She studied their patterns like a scientist observing a dangerous species through glass. No one knew that before she stood in corporate hallways holding documents, she had once been one of the sharpest analytical minds in a rising African tech firm. And no one knew how that same firm had been crushed overnight by a hostile acquisition, the signature on the final document belonging to none other than Sheikh Amir Ulfad. That day, Serena didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply watched as everything her team built, their dreams, their innovation, their future, was erased with the flick of a pen. In that moment, she learned something powerful. Real power does not shout. It signs papers. When she took a low-level job at one of his partnered companies in Dubai, people assumed it was desperation. A fall from grace. A woman without options. They were wrong. She wasn't there to survive. She was there to get close enough. Close enough to understand how the world's most untouchable man thought. Close enough to slip past the noise, past the security, past the layers of power. Close enough to look him in the eye one day and not look away. To the outside world, Sheikh Amir Olfard was a symbol of flawless control, a billionaire visionary with oil in one hand and global tech investments in the other. Every move he made was precise, calculated, immaculate. But perfection has one weakness. It never expects to be questioned. The meeting that morning was supposed to be like hundreds before it. A massive deal, a merger that would tighten his grip over 3 African tech corridors. On paper, it was a partnership. In reality, it was a quiet absorption. Another empire swallowed to fuel a larger one. Executives from Europe, American investors, and Arab financiers sat around the obsidian black conference table, their pens ready, their minds already counting profits that hadn't even existed yet. And Amir? He sat at the head like a king at a war council. His suit dark, his cufflinks engraved with his family crest, his posture relaxed, too relaxed. Because in his mind, everything was already his. His voice flowed like velvet, smooth, persuasive, dangerously calm, as he delivered the final terms in Arabic, a variation of the Gulf dialect so refined that only a native would catch the concealed clause embedded in his words. And so, he said, fingers lightly touching the table. All future adjustments will fall under executive revision in accordance with compliance flexibility. No one reacted. On the surface, it sounded harmless. Technical. Boring. But it wasn't harmless. It was a loaded weapon hidden inside elegant vocabulary. In that moment, something in the room shifted. It was so subtle, so fragile, like the faintest vibration in glass before it shatters. A presence. A silent awareness that someone had caught it. Amir felt it before he understood it. His eyes, cold, predatory, scanned the room. The investors looked satisfied. The legal team was frozen with that polished emptiness of people pretending to understand everything. Translators avoided eye contact, their faces stiff, because they had heard it, but they knew better than to react. And then, at the edge of the room, near the wall where staff usually vanish from notice, she didn't look away. Serena was standing there, holding a silver tray, motionless, steady. Her expression calm, but her eyes? Sharper than any executive in that room. For the first time in a very long time, Sheikh Amir Olfard felt seen. Not adored. Not feared. Seen. And it was not admiration in her gaze. It was recognition. Attention, invisible but sharp, sliced through the atmosphere like a wire pulled too tight. Executives continued flipping through documents, unaware that something was breaking outside the borders of their perception. Amir's gaze stayed on Serena, not blinking, not moving. He had seen 100 looks in his life: greed, fear, admiration, envy. But what he saw in her eyes was none of those. It was knowledge. Serena felt it too, that moment when the world stops, when your next word can rewrite your entire destiny or destroy it instantly. She should have bowed her head. She should have stepped back, blended again into the wall like all good staff were trained to do. But something inside her refused. For months, she had watched these deals, these men in suits devouring countries like pieces on a chessboard. She had memorized their patterns, their arrogance, the way they spoke about millions as if they were grains of sand, while her mother rationed medication in a one-bedroom apartment with cracked tiles. And now, here she was, with a chance she never asked for, standing between a billionaire and a signature that would enslave thousands of people under e-adjustment policy. Her throat tightened. Her pulse hammered. And yet, her voice came out steady. "Excuse me, sir." The room didn't just pause, it froze. One of the American investors made a confused sound, like he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. A junior translator looked at her in horror. Amir didn't move. But something in the air behind him, the aura of absolute control, fractured for the first time. "Repeat that," he said slowly, his voice soft but threaded with danger. Serena's hands tightened around the tray, but she didn't look away. "I said, 'Excuse me, sir,'" she replied, but this time she spoke in perfect Arabic, with the same exact dialect he had used. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. It was electric. It was war. Amir leaned back in his chair, studying her like a hunter studies the first prey that dares to step forward instead of running. For the first time today, he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind a king gives a challenger, just before deciding whether to crush them or crown them. A ripple of shock passed through the conference room like a wave crashing silently against glass. Executives exchanged glances. Some looked offended on Amir's behalf, others fascinated, like witnessing a lion suddenly confronted by a creature that wasn't supposed to have fangs. The translator beside Amir straightened, panic seeping into his features. He could already feel his position slipping, like sand through trembling fingers. Amir's fingers tapped once against the polished table. Once. Slow. Measured. Dangerous. It was a sound everyone in his inner circle knew too well. It meant, someone's future is about to end. "You imitate dialect, accurately," Amir said quietly, his Arabic smooth like a blade dipped in honey. "But do you understand the weight of interrupting me?" The word interrupting hit the room like a stone dropped in still water. Serena didn't flinch. That alone made one of the investors shift in his seat, uneasy. She should have apologized. She should have stepped back. Instead, she breathed in. "I understand the weight of words that bind nations," as she answered, her tone calm, too calm. "And your clause doesn't protect. It overrides." A sharp inhale cut the air from the legal team's side. The translator froze, realizing she had just decoded something most of the executives hadn't even noticed. A vein pulsed at Amir's temple, a tiny flicker, but it was there. Anger, yes, but also respect. The kind predators feel when prey looks back without fear. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, very slowly, Amir dismissed his translator with a flick of his fingers. The man hesitated, then stood, eyes wide, gathering his papers with trembling hands. Nobody dared speak. Nobody dared breathe too loudly. "Sit," Amir said, not to his translator, but to her. The room tensed. Some executives looked scandalized. Others, intrigued. Serena hesitated only a second. Then she placed the silver tray down and stepped forward. And that was the moment, the exact second, when everyone in that room felt it. This wasn't a servant stepping out of place. This was the beginning of a story. He started with small things that could be mistaken for coincidence. A delayed document, a deliberately misplaced contract, a silent command given with a mere lift of his eyebrow. The palace staff, those marble-faced men in tailored suits and the women who moved through the golden corridors like shadows, watched her every step. They did not blink, they did not smile, and from the way they studied her, she knew one thing with terrifying clarity: she was being evaluated. Every morning, her schedule was altered without warning. Meetings would be rescheduled, important clients would suddenly appear at the last minute, and the Sheikh would intentionally shift his tone between warmth and ice, just to see how she reacted. One day, he spoke to her with unexpected softness, almost like a confidant. The next, he ignored her presence entirely, treating her like air while giving orders through his deputy standing not 2 feet away from her. Most would have cracked under the psychological weight alone. But she didn't. Her heels clicked confidently on marble. Her voice remained steady, emotionless, loyal, but not submissive. She answered every command with precision, never allowing irritation to show, never giving in to confusion. In the palace, uncertainty was death, and she learned quickly, certainty had to be performed even when you didn't feel it. One evening, he summoned her to his private office at an unusually late hour. The palace was different at night, emptier, colder, the hallways echoing like a cathedral built for ghosts. She entered the office, the doors closed behind her with a sound that felt too final, too heavy for simple wood and gold. He didn't look at her at first. He simply stood near the window, the desert wind swallowing the silence outside, the city lights shimmering like fallen stars trapped under glass. "Tell me," he said finally, his voice low, deliberate, "why are you still here, Miss Carter?" It wasn't a question. It was a trap. Most would say something safe. Something flattering. Something to please him. She didn't. "Because I wasn't hired to leave," as she said calmly. For the first time since she arrived in this palace of golden secrets, he turned fully to look at her. Not with amusement. Not with curiosity. But with something deeper. Interest. There, in that silent moment, beneath chandeliers worth more than entire cities, she understood something. He wasn't just testing her efficiency. He was testing her soul. And God help anyone who failed that kind of test. People in places like this didn't simply see you. They classified you, filed you away the moment you stepped into their presence. And when she first arrived, that's exactly what they did. To them, she was just another assistant, someone who carried folders, arranged schedules, and disappeared when the real decisions began. The palace staff barely acknowledged her. The political advisors treated her like a piece of moving furniture. And the royal security looked through her, not at her. But that started to change. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Power never reveals its attention directly. It begins as a shift in the air, a flicker of awareness, like prey realizing it has wandered onto sacred hunting grounds. It began with silence. The kind of silence people make when they pause in the middle of speaking because they realize she is in the room. At first, she assumed it was coincidental. She told herself she was imagining it. But then it became undeniable. She entered a strategy meeting to deliver a file. Conversation stopped. Not because she interrupted, but because they were suddenly too careful with their words. 2 high-ranking ministers spoke in Arabic, assuming she didn't understand. She passed them a document and answered one of their questions before they asked it. A group of royal aides glanced at her badge, not to confirm her position, but to verify her name. Not what she was. Who she was. This was how power marked someone, not with open praise, but with sudden caution. No one said anything directly. No one complimented her or offered acknowledgement. They did something far more telling. They stopped ignoring her. In the world of billionaires, oil dynasties, and men whose signatures could shift the economy of entire nations, attention was the purest form of currency. and for reasons she couldn't fully understand yet. She was becoming very, very expensive. Yet with attention came danger. Because once power notices you, it must decide. Are you an asset or threat? And in the polished corridors of Sheikh Hassan's empire, those who were not assets did not stay long enough to become memories. There's a rule at the top of the world. Men like Sheikh Hassan never look directly at something unless they intend to use it or eliminate it. Up until now, he hadn't spoken to her privately. He hadn't even acknowledged her beyond a calculated glance. But that changed the moment he dismissed an entire boardroom to follow a thought she sparked. That's when the game began. It didn't start with a command. It started with a test. Late evening. After hours corridor. Most of the palace offices were empty, the lights dimmed to gold along the walls like a royal twilight. She carried a stack of financial reports to the archive wing when she heard it. Miss Williams. His voice was calm. Too calm. Like someone who had already made a decision about her. She stopped. Turned. He stood at the end of the hallway, not surrounded by guards, not flanked by advisors. Alone. Which made it infinitely more intimidating. Most people in his presence folded before he even spoke. They bowed, apologized, explained themselves before being accused of anything. They trembled in anticipation of his judgment. She didn't. She straightened her posture, not submissive, not arrogant, just steady. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. He approached slowly, footsteps so controlled it was like he had trained to never make a sound unless he chose to. Power, real power, did not need to rush. It could take its time, because everything else in the world would wait for it. When he stopped in front of her, he didn't speak right away. He studied her. Not like a man looks at a woman. Like a strategist studies a chess piece that wasn't originally on the board. How long have you been here? He asked. 3 months, she replied. No, he said. That one word. No. Like her answer was incorrect not factually, but philosophically. How long have you truly been here? He clarified, a present, while pretending to be invisible? She didn't answer immediately. He continued, slowly, deliberately. A person who understands contracts at that level does not come here to serve water and deliver papers. That is camouflage. Useful camouflage. But camouflage nonetheless. Her heart thudded. Not from fear. From realization. This wasn't a reprimand. This was the hunt beginning. Predators don't strike first. They circle. They observe. They corner. And now, she was cornered. But instead of stepping back, she held her ground and said the one thing very few people had dared to say to him in private. If I was hiding, you wouldn't have found me. Silence. Then, a slow, dangerous smile. Not of kindness. Of recognition. The kind of smile that meant. Good. The game will be interesting. Silence lingered between them like tension before a storm. That smile of his, slow, deliberate, was not approval. It was possession, the moment a predator marks something not as prey, but as potential. Walk with me, he said. Not a request. A command disguised as courtesy. She hesitated, not out of fear, but calculation. Every step beside this man would be a step into a different world, one where every word was currency and every look had consequence. She walked. They moved through a private wing of the building, the kind of place employees like her never saw. Marble floors changed to obsidian. Gold inlays glimmered under dim lighting. The air felt different here, quieter, colder, like sound itself had to ask permission to exist. He didn't speak right away. He let the silence do the work first. That was his style. Let the other person feel the weight of his presence until they broke the quiet first, revealing what they feared, what they wanted, what they couldn't hide. But she didn't speak. That intrigued him. Most people desperately filled silence, afraid that staying quiet made them look weak. She understood something deeper. Silence is not submission. Silence can be a weapon. Finally, he broke it. "They think you embarrassed me," he said calmly, hands clasped behind his back, steps perfectly in rhythm. "You didn't." She didn't respond. "You irritated me." That, she understood. Not because she had overstepped, but because she had shattered the choreography of power in that conference room, the expected, rehearsed dance where everyone bowed to him before he even entered. Diplomacy, he continued, is war, spoken through lawyers. Her eyes flicked toward him. He noticed. "You don't fight like they do," he said. "You don't wait for permission." Then, he stopped walking. She did too. They were alone in a corridor drenched in gold reflections, like standing inside the spine of a serpent. He turned to face her fully now. "Do you know what the most dangerous person in a negotiation is?" he asked. Her voice was steady. "Someone with nothing to lose." He stepped closer. "Wrong. The most dangerous person is someone who pretends they have nothing to lose." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them shifted, subtle but undeniable. Not romantic. Not yet. Something more volatile. Recognition. Two people from different worlds, one born into empires, one forced to build herself out of nothing, seeing a reflection they didn't expect in each other. Then, suddenly, he leaned in, just slightly, but enough to invade her space. "So tell me, Maya Williams, what are you pretending not to want?" Maya didn't step back when he leaned closer. Most people did. He was used to that, the subtle flinch, the respectful retreat. It was an unspoken ritual in his world. Proximity equals power, and people always gave him space out of fear or admiration. But she didn't move. She held her ground like the floor beneath her belonged to her just as much as it belonged to him. Her heartbeat quickened, yes, but her gaze stayed steady, anchored. Unmoved. Calculated. Present. Not submissive. Not defiant. Simply, there. And strangely, that unsettled him more than open rebellion would have. "You didn't answer," he said quietly. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly, an expression that carried both intelligence and caution. "Maybe I don't want anything," she said. A lie. He knew it. He respected how cleanly she delivered it. No tremor. No nervous swallow. Just a line placed on the table like a card turned face down. He gave a low, controlled exhale, not a laugh, but something close. A micro shift in expression, barely there, but for a man like him, that was reaction. "Everyone wants something," he said. "People like to pretend they don't want power because it makes them feel righteous. But power is oxygen. You only pretend you don't need it until you can breathe without asking." He stepped past her again. She followed, but not because he led, because she chose to. They reached a glass elevator, private, sleek, untouched by fingerprints. When the doors slid open, he didn't step inside immediately. Instead, He motioned for her to enter first. It wasn't courtesy. It was examination. Would she hesitate? Would she refuse? Would she obey immediately? She walked in without pausing. The door closed behind them with a quiet hiss. As the elevator began to ascend, the city lights outside turned into a shimmering blur. They rose past floors she never even knew existed, executive levels, restricted wings, the places where actual decisions were made while the rest of the world only saw the headlines. He watched her reflection in the glass, not her directly. A hunter's technique. You learn more when people forget they're being observed. But she knew. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve like she was reminding him, I see you too. For the first time in a long time, Sheikh Hassan al-Rashid was not leading a conversation. He was, or engaging in one. You speak Arabic well, he said slowly, eyes still fixed on the glass. I speak many things well, she replied. A fascinating answer. Not a thank you. Not he, I stuttered. Just a statement of fact, delivered like an equal. The elevator stopped, but the door didn't open. Top floor. But he hadn't given access yet. He turned to her again, and this time there was no smile. Just intent. This floor, he said, is not for staff. Up here, decisions aren't written. They're spoken. Deals aren't signed. They're sealed. He paused, just long enough to let meaning settle. If I bring you out there, you will not be invisible again. A warning. A promise. A test. She didn't blink. Then why open the elevator? She asked softly. He exhaled, slow. For the first time, his posture shifted, just slightly. Like a man realizing the game he set in motion was no longer his alone. The elevator doors opened with a sound too soft for a place so powerful, just a quiet chime, like a bell at a private ceremony. The kind you're either invited to, or never even learn exists. The air was different up here. Not colder, sharper. Not richer, heavier. Like oxygen that belonged to someone else. The walls were dark stone, polished to a mirrored sheen, with gold inlays that shimmered like veins. At the end of the corridor stood two men in suits, not hotel security. Personal guards. The kind that didn't ask questions. They silently recorded faces. When they looked at her, they hesitated. Not because she was a threat, but because she wasn't classified. Not staff. Not guest. Not important. But brought by him. And that made her undefined. Undefined was dangerous. The guards looked at Hassan, waiting for a nod. He didn't give it. He just walked. And they stepped aside anyway. Because power doesn't request permission. It alters rules by existing. She followed. They entered a long room without doors, only an archway of carved black stone framing an open space lit by long vertical windows. Outside, the sun was setting, spilling gold light over the skyline like molten metal. Silhouettes of men in tailored suits and women in sharp dresses stood near a long table made of obsidian glass. Their reflections rippled beneath them like shadows detached from bodies. Every conversation in the room paused. Not stopped, paused. A subtle difference. Like pages of a book held open mid-sentence. One of the executives, a tall man with silver hair and a diamond watch, looked at Hassan and said loudly enough for the room to hear. We weren't informed you'd be bringing staff. The word staff landed like a cheap token thrown on marble. Meyer did not lower her head. She looked directly at him, not aggressively, just present. That presence alone, it rattled him. Hassan walked past, unfazed, pausing beside the man just long enough to speak without turning his head. You weren't informed because you don't decide who belongs in my negotiations. A flicker of discomfort passed through the room, like a ripple of static through velvet. She noticed everything. The way 3 executives subtly turned their bodies away so she wouldn't be included in their conversational circle. The way 2 advisors watched her hands, trying to identify her role by how she carried her posture. Servant? Assistant? Translator? The way one woman in a red blazer did not look away. Her gaze was calculating, not dismissive. Interesting. A woman who recognized another woman entering a battlefield too many believed belonged only to men. A man with a low voice and an expensive accent leaned toward the others and muttered, "She's just a decoration." He's making a point. Meyer heard it. So did Hassan. He didn't correct them. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, clearly, deliberately, "Miss Williams will remain in this room. Speak as you would in front of me, or remain silent." He didn't introduce her. He didn't justify her presence. He just declared it. That was worse than introducing her, because introduction implies explanation. He gave none. Which meant one thing. She didn't need legitimacy. His acknowledgement was legitimacy. Conversations hesitated, then resumed, but with new tension. Meyer stood on the edge of the space like a storm pulling gravity. They tried to ignore her. They wouldn't succeed. The room is quiet, too quiet. The Sheikh's eyes stay fixed on her, calm on the surface, but calculating underneath. He thinks he has seen every possible reaction from people. Fear, obedience, nervous attempts to please. He's used to that. But this woman, she looks at him like she's reading him, not just answering questions. He leans back in his expensive leather chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the polished desk. He wants to see her break. But she doesn't. She keeps her posture straight, her tone steady. Not defiant, but unshaken, as if she knows something he doesn't. Most people, when someone with his level of power starts testing them, they shrink. They speak faster, or softer, trying not to step on invisible lines. Her? She's not reckless, but she's not bending either. And the Sheikh notices something unusual. She isn't trying to impress him. She's trying to understand him. When he throws subtle verbal traps, she doesn't panic. She answers carefully, but there's a glint in her eyes, like she's analyzing every word he says. Not submissive. Not rebellious. Strategic. For a moment, he almost smirks. He wasn't expecting a challenge this early. The Sheikh slightly narrows his eyes, and something in the air shifts. Until now, his tone had been controlled, testing, but calm. Now, there's a new edge in his voice, barely noticeable to the inexperienced ear, but sharp enough for someone perceptive like her to feel it. He speaks slower now. Like a predator adjusting its speed, not because it's tired, but because it enjoys the hunt. He asks a question that doesn't sound like a question at all. It sounds like a command wrapped in polite wording. The kind designed to corner people, to make them expose their fear. Most would do exactly what he expects. Over-explain. Apologize. Try to fix an imaginary mistake. But she doesn't. She pauses for a second. Just one heartbeat. Then she answers, not with a long justification, not with rushed politeness, but with a precisely measured response. Short. Confident. Completely on point. The room goes quiet again. He hears something dangerous in her tone. Control. She didn't challenge him directly. That would be foolish. Instead, she did something far more impressive in his world. She answered perfectly, without submitting. And that is what makes him change the rules. He leans forward, finally showing interest. That subtle, predatory amusement flashes in his eyes, the kind only men with absolute power have when they realize the game is going to be interesting. Let's continue, he says, but this time it's not a statement. It's a move. And she understands it immediately. She straightens just a bit more. Her eyes steady, her breathing controlled. Most people would only feel tension. But between them, there's now a silent agreement. If he plays harder, she will rise to match him. He doesn't speak right away. In most situations, silence is just silence. But not here. Not when silence comes from a man like him. A man. He casually leans back in his chair, fingers interlaced, gaze fixed on her without blinking. He doesn't ask the next question. He doesn't rush. He simply watches. And that watching. For most people, conversation is a weapon. For him. Because silence, in the hands of someone powerful, is not a pause. It's the brightest minds in finance, politics, international negotiations. They've all sat where she's sitting now. And many of them have made the same mistake. They couldn't handle waiting. So they filled the silence. They started talking. Explaining. Filling air just to escape the weight of being silently examined. 90%. He taps his finger once on the table. Slow, deliberate. Not impatient. No, impatience would humanize him. This gesture does the opposite. It reminds her. You are in his space. In his time. And time, here, doesn't move unless he allows it. Most would fold. Most would speak. Most would try to impress, to say what he wants to hear. She doesn't look away. She doesn't rush to speak. Instead, she mirrors him in the smallest, most elegant way possible. She calmly straightens a single paper in front of her. Perfectly aligned. Precise. A deliberate act of control inside his silence. For the first time, something unreadable flashes in his eyes. Not irritation. Not approval. He finally speaks, quietly, almost lazily. Continue. But this time, they both know. She shifts slightly, just enough to catch his gaze without flinching. Her fingers hover over the papers for a heartbeat, and then she begins. Not a nervous stammer. Not a rush to fill the silence. Just words, precise, deliberate, like steps on thin ice. Every phrase measured. Every glance intentional. Every pause, as if she knows, this pause is part of the conversation. Only this way can one speak to a man who wields silence like a weapon. He leans forward now. Subtle. Almost imperceptible. But the change is there. The air thickens. His fingers tap the table in a rhythm so faint it's almost inaudible, a rhythm meant to unsettle. To test. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she tilts her head slightly, not submissive, not defiant. Just attentive. Calculated. Like a master playing chess. For the first time, the room feels or balanced. Not because she's equal to him, she isn't. Not yet. But because she refuses to be crushed by his power. Because she moves within it, without resisting it. He studies her. Really studies her. And in that gaze, there's a spark, something unspoken. Recognition. Curiosity. And he realizes she's the first person in a long time who doesn't break under his silence. Not with words. Not with fear. Not with false smiles. With presence. With poise. With controlled defiance. He leans back again. That lazy, deliberate tilt of his chair. But now it's different. He's not just watching. He's observing. An experiment, a challenge, maybe even a game. And in the quiet between them, a new rule is made. He doesn't control her. Not completely. She doesn't submit. Not yet. But for the first time, both know. They are dancing on the same floor. He doesn't speak immediately. Instead, he watches her, leaning back, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. But this time, it's different. The silence isn't a weapon, or not yet. It's a tease. A test. Tell me, he says finally, his voice smooth, casual, almost lazy. What would you do if everything depended on a single choice? The question is simple. Innocuous. Even. But the way he says it, it's loaded. It's a trap wrapped in velvet. She doesn't answer right away. She tilts her head, studying him as if reading invisible text on his expression. The pause stretches, long enough to feel like a heartbeat. Then she speaks. Calm. Controlled. Precise. I would do what's necessary, as she says, her tone almost casual, but with a weight behind it that anchors the room. He smiles. Just a faint curve of lips. Not approval. Not disdain. Something else. Interest. Curiosity. The spark from before flares, subtle, dangerous. He leans forward just slightly, reducing the space between them. A small gesture, but deliberate. And if necessary, to defy, he asks softly, letting the words hang. Her eyes meet his, unwavering. I would defy, when it matters, as she replies. For a moment, he studies her as if seeing her for the first time. Then he reclines again, slow, deliberate, letting the tension breathe. The air between them shifts. It's no longer just silence. It's anticipation. A delicate game. And in that quiet, unspoken agreement forms. This is no longer just an examination. This is a challenge. And neither of them is walking away unchanged. The room hums with a quiet electricity. He doesn't speak, but every movement is deliberate, a shift in posture, a glance, the faint tap of a pen against the table. She notices it all. Every tiny detail. And instead of flinching, she leans in, or just enough to match his focus. A silent acknowledgement that she's playing the game on her terms. He tilts his head, studying her in a way that feels intimate, though no words have crossed the space between them yet. There's a tension building, not sexual. Not yet. Something sharper, the tension of minds circling, testing boundaries. He finally breaks the silence, voice low, almost a whisper. You're not like the others. She meets his gaze evenly. I've never wanted to be. A flicker, almost imperceptible, crosses his eyes. Approval? Amusement? Something in between. He leans forward slightly, just a fraction, and the distance between them shrinks by inches, though neither moves physically. Do you understand? He says carefully, how rare that is? She doesn't smile. She simply tilts her head and lets the silence answer for her. And in that silence, he realizes she's not just enduring the test. She's shaping it. She's bending it. Matching him. Reading him. For the first time, he feels a tug, subtle, unspoken, a pull he hasn't felt in years. Not with his power. Not with wealth. Not with influence. She hasn't spoken a single word to flirt. She hasn't made a single move to submit. And yet, she's inside his mind. The game has changed. And neither of them will ever go back to how it began. He doesn't speak immediately. Instead, he watches, leaning back with that same controlled poise, letting the silence stretch like a taut wire across the room. Every movement is deliberate. The slight tilt of his chair, the faint tap of his fingers against the desk, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes. Each gesture is a question, a puzzle, a test. She notices every one. Every flicker of motion, every subtle change in the air. And instead of flinching, she adapts. She mirrors him ever so slightly, a calculated reflection, not submission, not defiance, but presence. Awareness. She moves within his space without challenging it, bending the tension without breaking. Finally, he speaks, but not to her directly. His voice is soft, almost conversational, yet carries weight. Decisions reveal more than words ever could. She doesn't respond immediately. She allows the words to settle, to hang between them like smoke, thick and palpable. Then, almost casually, she begins her first maneuver, a choice in action rather than speech. She organizes the papers in front of her, not because they're disordered, but because the act itself is a statement, measured, deliberate, controlled. He leans in just slightly, a fraction closer than before. The air between them tightens, charged. He's testing boundaries now, not with questions, but with space, with presence. With the unspoken. Every glance, every tilt of his head, every flicker of his gaze challenges her. Will you bend? Will you break? Will you falter? She meets it all without wavering. Her hand pours briefly on a pen, then she sets it down slowly, deliberately, not hurried, not hesitant. Every tiny movement is a declaration. I am aware. I am deliberate. I am not yours to control. The silence stretches again. Longer this time. He studies her as if peeling back layers, looking for a crack. Most would have faltered by now, filling the emptiness with nervous words, laughter, excuses. She fills it instead with presence. Confidence. Calculated patience. And then he speaks again, this time directly, softer, slower. Courage or stubbornness? Her eyes meet his without hesitation. A quiet smile tugs at the corner of her lips, almost imperceptible. Perhaps both, she replies. He leans back, letting out a soft, almost inaudible chuckle, rare, unguarded. It's not approval. Not yet. But it's recognition. Interest. A spark that wasn't there before. Then he shifts, subtly, his hands resting lightly on the desk. He begins to introduce small, deliberate obstacles, subtle challenges, a misplaced document, a question phrased to mislead, a faintly impossible request. Each one is a test, not of her skills, but of her composure. Of her ability to remain herself under pressure, under observation, under his unrelenting gaze. She meets each test without panic, without apology. Sometimes she hesitates. Sometimes she adjusts. But always, always with poise. Each success is quiet, unspoken. Each failure is invisible. And with every move, the tension grows. The unspoken dialogue between them thickens. He realizes something that unsettles him more than he expects. She's not just enduring his tests. She's shaping them, bending them, anticipating them. She reads him in ways even he didn't expect. And in that realization, he feels it. A pull. Subtle, dangerous, magnetic. Not of desire. Not yet. But of fascination. For the first time in years, someone has entered his game here on their own terms. And neither of them can ever return to the simplicity of before. The game has escalated. The stakes are unspoken. And in the quiet, only one truth remains. He cannot control her. She cannot be ignored. And yet, they are both playing, each move a test, each glance a challenge, each silence a battlefield. The office feels smaller now. Tension coils around them like smoke, thick and invisible. He doesn't speak at first. Instead, he watches her, every blink, every subtle breath, every slight adjustment of posture meticulously noted. His silence is no longer just a weapon, it's a lens, magnifying the slightest flicker of emotion. She notices, naturally. Every twitch of his eyes, every faint crease in his brow. But instead of retreating, she leans into it, subtly mirroring his movements, creating a rhythm that belongs to neither of them entirely, yet feels familiar to both. Then he begins. Slowly, carefully, like placing a delicate object on the edge of a table. Tell me about the decision you regret the most. It's simple. Innocuous. Even. But layered. There's no malice in the words. Only the weight of expectation. His not asking for a story, his testing her reaction, the tremor of hesitation, the glance, the tone, the truth behind the performance. She pauses. Not because she's unprepared. Not because she fears him. But because she understands the game now. Words are not shields here. Silence is not surrender. I once trusted someone too easily, as she says finally, her voice measured, steady. It cost me. But it taught me something. He leans slightly forward, narrowing the space, his eyes flicking to hers with that subtle, calculated intensity. The kind of look that presses on the mind, pokes at vulnerabilities, yet doesn't reveal a single fragment of his own. And what did it teach you? He asks softly, almost lazily, but each word lands like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples across her composure. That caution without fear is a weapon, as she replies, her voice unwavering. And fear without caution is dangerous. For a moment, he doesn't move. He studies her as though seeing her for the first time, not her actions, not her words, but the space between them. That invisible layer where truth and control intertwine. Then he shifts again. This time, not with words, but gestures. He leaves a small stack of papers slightly askew, as if by accident. A deliberate misplacement designed to provoke a reaction. She notices immediately. Her hand hovers for a second, then she adjusts them, slowly, deliberately. Not hurried. Not nervous. Not obedient. A quiet assertion. I see. I control myself. I respect the rules of your game. On my terms. He leans back, almost imperceptibly smiling. The first sign of genuine intrigue flickers across his features. No approval, no condescension. Only recognition. Someone who can navigate his world without losing themselves. Then, he tilts his head, voice dropping to a whisper. Emotions are dangerous here. They betray you more quickly than lies ever could. She doesn't respond immediately. She allows the words to hang, heavy in the air. And in that silence, she demonstrates mastery of another layer of the test: restraint, awareness, emotional poise. Then I will ensure mine speak only when I allow them, she finally says, quietly, yet firmly. He leans forward slightly, the faintest narrowing of his eyes, a predator acknowledging prey, yet not with hunger, but fascination. The tension has shifted. It is no longer solely his to command. She now holds a piece of it too. For the first time, he realizes she's not merely surviving the test. She's shaping it, controlling it, reading him as he reads her, predicting his moves while maintaining her own. And in that realization, you're a thrill, a challenge, a pull he hasn't felt in years. And in the thick silence that follows, both understand the unspoken truth. This is no longer a game of dominance or submission. It's a war of understanding, strategy, and intuition. And neither of them will leave it unchanged. The room is quiet now, but it hums with everything that has passed between them. Words have been few, but their weight is heavy. Silence has stretched, contracted, and held them both captive in its invisible grip. He leans back one final time, letting the tension settle like dust after a storm. Not because the game is over, but because the rhythm has changed. She has endured, navigated, and shaped it. The rules are no longer his alone. She sits perfectly still, her hands folded, her gaze calm. She has not yielded. She has not fled. She has simply been. And in that simple presence lies a power he has not encountered in years. For a long moment, they simply look at each other. Not testing. Not challenging. Not teasing. Observing. A silent acknowledgement of mutual respect, of shared understanding, of a dance performed without music but with every motion deliberate. Then he speaks. Softly, almost reluctantly. You are different. She doesn't smile. She doesn't nod. She simply inclines her head slightly, acknowledging the truth of it without embellishment. He studies her for a moment longer. A flicker of something almost human crosses his features: admiration, curiosity, maybe even a trace of longing. But he does not act on it. Not here. Not now. Finally, he stands. The shift in posture, subtle yet deliberate, signals the end of this encounter. Yet it is not a departure. It is a pause. A promise of continuation, unspoken, understood. She gathers her papers, arranges them with her signature precision, and rises. Not rushed, not hesitant, not submissive. Every movement deliberate, controlled, commanding. He watches, and in that watching there is no dominance, no power play. Only awareness. Respect. Recognition that she is no longer merely a subject of his tests, she is a force unto herself. As she leaves the room, the silence lingers. It is no longer oppressive. It is charged. Alive. Filled with possibilities, with unspoken challenges, with the quiet thrill of minds that have met and will meet again. And in that lingering quiet, both understand something simple, unshakable. The game is not over. It has only changed. And neither will ever be the same.